Why do the same stories keep repeating, again and again? We leave a painful relationship. We swear to ourselves, never again. This time I'll choose differently. And yet, after some time passes, we find ourselves once more drawn to someone who ends up hurting us. At first, it feels electric. The attraction, the sense that we've finally found the one. The sweet words, the promises, the attention, the care. But slowly, almost predictably, it all turns into control, devaluation, and endless drama. The faces change, but the script stays the same. And at some point, the haunting question arises. Is this just bad luck? A blind choice? Or is there a deeper pattern behind why we keep attracting toxic partners? Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Our inner wounds, our fears, our unresolved conflicts, they act like magnets. What we're often seeking isn't love in its true form, but a mirror that reflects our shadow. And as long as that shadow remains unacknowledged, we end up trapped in the same storylines over and over. Picture a young woman who grew up in a home where love had to be earned. Be good, be useful, prove yourself. Then you'll be worthy of affection. As an adult, she repeatedly finds herself with partners who are distant, demanding, or emotionally cold. Why? Because her unconscious is searching for that familiar script. The chance to redo it, to finally win the warmth she was denied as a child. The same happens for men. Someone raised with a controlling or unpredictable parent may spend his adult life drawn to partners who put him right back in that role, constantly explaining himself, trying to measure up, always proving his worth. Without realizing it, he's reliving the old drama, instead of breaking free from it. Toxic partners don't enter our lives by coincidence. They're projections of our inner wounds. We don't attract them because we want to suffer, but because on some deeper level, we're unconsciously searching for closure to an unfinished story, and until we recognize the pattern, the story will repeat itself. The first factor is unconscious childhood patterns. Very often, the choice of a toxic partner doesn't actually begin in adulthood. It begins much earlier, in childhood. Our very first experiences of love and closeness become the template through which we later build adult relationships. If a child grows up in an environment where warmth and attention are inconsistent, sometimes given, sometimes withheld, an inner belief begins to form. Love is always tied to tension and pain. Take, for example, a girl who only received praise from her parents when she achieved something. She learned the lesson. I am loved only if I work hard, only if I prove myself. As an adult, she unconsciously gravitates toward people who demand constant proof, who set conditions, who never allow her to feel good enough just as she is. She doesn't seek this dynamic on purpose, but deep inside, the old script feels familiar. It feels like home. Or imagine a boy who grew up with an emotionally distant mother, one who rarely showed tenderness. He became accustomed to the idea that love equals distance and waiting. Later in life, he may be drawn to women who are cold or unavailable because that dynamic is what feels most real to him. Carl Jung described this as the repetition of an archetypal script. We don't always search for love itself. We search for the chance to play the old play one more time, this time hoping for a different ending. The unconscious whispers, maybe this time it will be different. Maybe this time I'll finally get the warmth I was missing as a child. But the tragedy is that the story usually repeats itself exactly as before. Instead of healing, we find ourselves once again in the role of the child, waiting, hoping, trying, only to be met with the same coldness, criticism, or distance. And so the circle continues. The harder we try to escape the pain of the past, the more tightly we become trapped inside it. The second factor is the habit of pain and chaos. Sometimes toxic relationships feel normal, not because someone consciously chooses them, but because they simply don't know another model. From childhood, they may have grown used to emotional swings. Moments of warmth, followed by coldness. Praise replaced with criticism. Over time, this turbulence becomes familiar, almost comfortable. Where a healthy person seeks stability, someone with this kind of background often experiences calmness as something's wrong. The paradox is that they come to believe real love must always include drama. If he's jealous, it means he cares. If she makes scenes, it means she feels deeply. Slowly, a dangerous belief takes root. Pain becomes proof of love, and chaos becomes the sign of closeness. Imagine a driver who has spent their whole life on a broken, uneven road. Every journey is full of bumps, sudden turns, and deep potholes. Then one day they finally drive onto smooth asphalt. The ride is quiet, steady, easy. You would think this is the dream. But instead, their first thought is, something feels off. Something's missing. The silence and smoothness feel more unsettling than the bumps they've always known. The same thing happens in relationships. When a person who is used to chaos meets a partner who behaves calmly, respectfully, and consistently, they may feel an odd sense of emptiness. Where there should be comfort, they feel boredom. Where there should be peace, they sense a lack of passion. Take, for example, a woman who, after a series of turbulent romances, finally meets a man who respects her boundaries, cares about her well-being, and doesn't create drama. Logically, this is exactly the kind of relationship she dreamed of. But deep inside, something resists. Where are the emotions? Where's the intensity? If she doesn't recognize this inner mechanism, she may be pulled back toward those who promise excitement, but bring pain with it. Carl Jung wrote that the unconscious has a strong tendency to repeat familiar patterns, even when they are destructive. That is why someone may choose, over and over again, partners who hurt them. Chaos feels familiar, and the unconscious often mistakes the familiar for what is right. This is how the illusion is formed. Peaceful relationships are labeled as boring, while suffering is mistaken for true love. But in reality, it's not passion and it's not closeness. It's dependency, where chaos becomes the drug and pain its constant companion. The third factor is dependence on external validation. Toxic partners have an uncanny ability to sense someone's vulnerability. It's as if they instinctively know what a person is missing inside. For some, it's recognition. For others, it's attention. For many, it's the deep need to feel important and valued. And in the beginning, that's exactly what they offer. Words of admiration, compliments, exaggerated care, all of it works like a hook. But with the sweetness almost always comes the poison. Once the attachment is formed, the dynamic begins to shift. Control creeps in, devaluation begins, manipulation takes hold. Suddenly, the compliments are replaced with cutting remarks. You're nothing without me. You're too sensitive. You should be grateful I'm even here. What once felt like a source of strength quickly becomes a weapon of power. Picture a woman who has always felt that her achievements went unnoticed. Then she meets a man who showers her with praise. You're incredible. You're special. For the first time, she feels seen. She blossoms in the glow of his attention. But as time passes, the tone shifts. Those same words become tools of control. You're special only with me. Without me, you're nothing. She knows it's destructive, yet breaking free feels almost impossible. Those rare drops of validation become like oxygen, painful to live without. Or consider a workplace example. A narcissistic colleague may start by praising your contributions, highlighting your successes, making you feel essential. But soon enough, it flips. The praise turns into a trap. He uses it to put you in a position of dependence, then undermines you, forcing you to prove your worth again and again. You end up caught in a cycle where every rare good job feels precious, even though it's immediately followed by another sting. Carl Jung wrote that as long as a person seeks affirmation of the self only from the outside, they remain dependent on someone else's power. External validation becomes like a drug. It provides a short-lived burst of confidence, but never strengthens the inner foundation. And the toxic partner knows this. They exploit that hunger for recognition as an endless resource. At its core, this bond is not built on love. It's built on dependence. The person doesn't hold on because the relationship is fulfilling, but because they fear losing those rare, fleeting moments of being seen. And that dependency is exactly what makes leaving so incredibly difficult. The fourth factor is the shadow and projection. Each of us carries a shadow, the parts of our personality that we suppress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. Carl Jung said the shadow is inevitable. It holds our repressed desires, our fears, and those hidden aspects of ourselves that we would rather keep buried. And very often, it is our partner who becomes the mirror of that shadow. Imagine someone who grew up being told, "Don't get angry, be good, don't argue." From childhood, they learned that anger was bad, so they buried it deep, pretending it didn't exist. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, and sooner or later, it demands expression. This person might unconsciously be drawn to a partner who expresses anger for both of them, yelling, pushing, creating conflict. And instead of resisting, they endure it, because in some strange way, the anger feels familiar. It fills the gap left by their own denied emotions. Or take another example. A person is terrified of being alone and spends their life avoiding solitude at all costs. That fear itself makes them vulnerable. They attract partners who vanish, withdraw, or disappear without explanation. And every time it happens, the fear of abandonment is triggered again, over and over, until it becomes unbearable. It's as if the unconscious is saying, "Look here, this is your shadow. You must face it." In this sense, toxic relationships are not just about ending up with the wrong person. They are about inner patterns choosing a mirror. The partner becomes a reflection of what we refuse to see: our fragility, our fear, our insecurity. That is why such relationships can be so difficult to break. Deep down, a person senses that what they are facing is not only about love or pain. It is also about a confrontation with themselves. Jung warned that as long as the shadow remains unacknowledged, it runs a person's life, and they will find themselves repeating the same story again and again. Toxic relationships, then, are signals. They reveal that there is something unresolved inside, something asking for awareness. They are mirrors in which we don't just see the partner in front of us. We see the parts of ourselves that we've avoided for too long, the very parts that are waiting to be recognized. Why do we so often find ourselves with toxic partners again and again? The answer is both simple and complex. Because inside us, there are wounds and unfinished stories that have never been healed. These patterns go back to childhood, to those first experiences of love and attachment where we learned what it meant to feel needed, valued, or loved. And if those early experiences were marked by too much pain, criticism, coldness, or chaos, then as adults, we are unconsciously drawn to the same dynamics. This isn't about a conscious choice. Nobody tells themselves, "I want to suffer." It's about the hidden work of the unconscious. As long as unprocessed wounds remain inside, they will seek expression. That's why toxic partners show up again and again. They act as mirrors of our shadow, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." These words hold the key. We often think, I'm just unlucky. I met the wrong person again. But in reality, it's not about luck or coincidence. It's about a recurring pattern that continues until we finally bring it into awareness. Imagine a person walking in circles. Each time they meet someone who first gives them a sense of importance, and then eventually wounds them and takes it away. The script repeats itself again and again, until one day that person finally stops and asks, "Why do I keep choosing the same kind of partner?" That single question becomes the first step out of the circle. The realization that partners are not random, that they mirror our inner wounds, is the beginning of freedom. The next step is turning inward, seeing our own needs clearly, acknowledging our fears, and learning to give ourselves what we once relied on others for. When we stop searching for validation of the self outside, we stop being vulnerable to those who would exploit that hunger. And then, something new becomes possible. Not relationships built on power struggles, manipulation, and devaluation, but relationships built on support, acceptance, and genuine closeness.